The London of Charlie Chaplin's birth was a city of visceral contrasts. The grandeur of the British Empire, embodied in the imposing architecture of Whitehall and the Mall, crumbled at its edges into a festering sprawl of poverty. The air in the southern districts like Walworth was thick with the smog of coal fires, the pungent smell of horse manure, and the ever-present damp miasma of the Thames. It was here, at 8 p.m. on April 16, 1889, in a small rented room on East Street, that Charles Spencer Chaplin entered a world perpetually on the brink of collapse. His parents were soldiers in the army of the music hall, a world itself of glaring contrasts, the dazzling brightness of the stage versus the grimy reality of backstage, the adulation of the crowd versus the quiet desperation of the performer. His father, Charles Chaplin Sr., was a notable figure in this world. With his sharp, handsome features and a rich baritone voice ideal for sentimental Irish ballads like Molly Riley and Oh, Mr. Porter, he could command a stage and a decent wage. But his charm, like the stage lights, was ephemeral. Offstage, he was a specter, a man whose presence was defined more by his absence. He was a slave to alcohol, a vice that was cheap and plentiful in the pubs that dotted every corner. The money that should have gone for rent and food for his common-law wife Hannah and their two sons, Charlie and his 4-year-old elder half-brother Sidney, was often funneled directly into the till of the local public house. Hannah Chaplin, née Hill, was the sun around which young Charlie's universe revolved. Petite, with large, dark, expressive eyes and a delicate, ethereal stage presence. Her specialty was comic and sentimental songs, delivered not with power but with a winsome, intimate charm that drew audiences in. She was the anchor, the storyteller, the source of warmth in the cold, drafty rooms they moved between as funds waxed and waned. She would perform for Charlie and Sidney, acting out scenes from the plays she had seen, mimicking the other performers, her face a fluid canvas of emotion. It was from her that Charlie received his first and most crucial lessons in pantomime and the art of capturing an audience's heart.
But the strain of this life was immense. The Chaplin household was a precarious vessel navigating a stormy sea of financial insecurity. The fear of the landlord's knock, the sound of a demand for unpaid rent, was a constant terror. The family's addresses changed with a dizzying frequency that mapped their declining fortunes, from slightly more respectable lodgings to single rooms, and finally to the very edge of destitution. The first seismic crack in Charlie's world appeared when he was barely 5. He was standing in the wings of the Aldershot Canteen, a particularly rough theater patronized by rowdy soldiers. Hannah was on stage, her voice weaving its usual magic. Then, mid-song, it happened. Her voice cracked, faltered, and died in her throat. A nervous tremor seized her. The soldiers, initially a warm sea of faces, began to shift and murmur. The murmur grew into a rumble of discontent, then jeers and catcalls. Something in Hannah broke. She was led off stage, humiliated and disoriented, her mind retreating from the unbearable reality. Panic backstage, the manager, desperate to salvage the act, his eyes scanning the frantic scene, fell upon little Charlie. He knew the boy sometimes performed with his mother. In an act of sheer, unthinking desperation, he shoved the child into the blinding glare of the footlights. The boy stood alone, squinting into the darkness, the heat of the gaslights on his skin. The audience, a monstrous, noisy beast moments before, fell into a curious silence, staring at this tiny, bewildered figure. And then, an instinct took over, an instinct bred in the bone from watching his mother. Charlie began to sing a popular music hall tune of the day, Jack Jones. But he didn't just sing it, he performed it. He lisped the lyrics with a cocky confidence, telling the crowd what he was about to do. He danced the few steps he had picked up, a comic shuffle. He imitated his mother's gestures, her cadences. The transformation was alchemical. The hostility of the crowd melted, transmuted first into surprise, then into delight. Laughter, genuine and roaring, replaced the jeers. And then, coins. They began to rain onto the stage, pennies and halfpennies clinking and rolling on the boards. With a practicality that was both heartbreaking and hilarious, Charlie stopped his performance. He announced he would pick up the money first, and then he would continue. He meticulously gathered the coins, his small hands struggling to hold them all, stuffing them into his pockets. This pragmatic interruption, this breaking of the fourth wall, sent the audience into further ecstasies. It was his first taste of it, the power to command love, to transmute chaos into order, humiliation into triumph through the sheer force of performance. It was a lesson he would never forget, but the triumph was terrifyingly fleeting. Backstage, the reality was his mother, broken and sobbing. The applause was a sugarcoating on a pill of profound trauma. The incident was not mere stage fright. It was the first public manifestation of a psychological descent that poverty and stress had precipitated. The scent of grease paint was now forever intertwined with the scent of fear. The descent was swift and brutal. Hannah's mental state, a condition likely exacerbated by syphilis contracted in her youth, unraveled completely. She suffered from persecutory delusions and profound depression, drifting in and out of lucidity. She was in and out of work, her reliability shattered. Charles Sr. was a non-entity, his own life spiraling into the final, fatal stages of alcoholism. The parish authorities, the cold, impersonal arm of the Victorian state, finally intervened. Hannah Chaplin was declared a pauper lunatic and committed to the Cane Hill Asylum in 1896. For 7-year-old Charlie and 11-year-old Sydney, it was the end of the world they knew. They were now wards of the state, destined for the Lambeth Workhouse and its associated school for paupers at Hanwell. The journey to Hanwell was a descent into a different kind of London, an institutionalized, soul-crushing landscape. The Central London District School at Hanwell was a massive, forbidding complex, a factory for processing the children of the destitute. The gates clanged shut behind them with a sound of finality. The first ritual was one of dehumanization. They were stripped of their own clothes, their hair was shorn to the scalp to prevent lice, and they were issued stiff, rough, gray uniforms that identified them as inmates. They were numbers now, not boys. Life was a brutal, monotonous metronome of discipline. Their days were governed by bells. Bells to wake, bells to pray, bells to eat, bells to work, bells to sleep. The food was a bland, meager sustenance designed for survival, not pleasure. Gruel, dry bread, a thin stew. Hunger was a constant gnawing companion, but the emotional starvation was far worse. Affection was forbidden. Punishment for minor infractions was swift and often cruel, involving the cane or solitary confinement.
Charlie and Sydney, as brothers, were a rare unit in this system, but they were separated, only allowed to see each other for a few hours on Sunday afternoons. Those brief meetings were lifelines. Sydney, the more pragmatic and protective, became a surrogate parent. He would share any extra morsel of food he had managed to save, offering Charlie words of encouragement, a bulwark against the despair. The most searing memory of this period was a visiting day. The boys were taken to see their mother at Cane Hill. The asylum was a Gothic nightmare of high walls and barred windows. They were led into a bleak courtyard, and there was Hannah. The beautiful, vibrant woman who had filled their world with song and stories was now a ghost. Her hair was lank, her face pale and hollow, her eyes vacant. She was led by an attendant like a sleepwalker. She barely recognized her own sons. The sight was so profoundly shocking that Charlie's mind, in an act of self-preservation, partially repressed it. It became a submerged trauma, a ghost that would haunt his films, manifesting in the vulnerable, often mentally fragile women the Tramp seeks to protect. After 18 months, the boys were released, not to a home, but into the care of their father and his new mistress, Louise. The environment at 287 Kennington Road was a fresh hell. Louise, a hard, bitter woman who saw the boys as rivals for Charles Sr.'s dwindling resources and affections, was openly hostile. She was a violent drunk, and Charlie became her particular target. The neglect was profound. They were often left to fend for themselves, scavenging for food. The lowest point came when, in a drunken rage, Louise threw the 7-year-old Charlie out of a first-floor window. It was an attempted murder, Miraculously, he was caught by a passerby. The incident was so commonplace in the brutal landscape of South London poverty that it barely registered. Throughout this, the stage remained his only fantasy of escape. He clung to the memory of Aldershot, the sound of the coins, the warmth of the laughter. It was his North Star. Salvation, of a sort, arrived through the very world that had broken his parents. His father, in a rare moment of sobriety, or perhaps guilt, used his music hall connections to get Charlie a place with the 8 Lancashire Lads, a professional clog dancing troupe. It was grueling work. The tours were long, the rehearsals demanding, the performances multiple times a day in often dingy halls. The comedians were expected to be acrobats, dancers, and actors, enduring physical punishment night after night. Charlie studied his seniors like a scholar. He was particularly influenced by the company's top star, Billy Reeves, who specialized in a brilliant drunk act. Reeves's drunk was not just a stumbling fool, he was a man of immense dignity, constantly betrayed by his own body and his environment. Charlie absorbed the lesson. Comedy was not about being funny. It was about being a real person in an absurd situation.
He quickly graduated from small parts to leading roles. He developed his own drunk act, but he infused it with a deeper pathos. His drunk was more vulnerable, more poetic, a dreamer adrift in a hostile world. He also played the swell, the dandy, a character he would later deconstruct to create the Tramp. The Carnot years honed his craft to a razor's edge. He learned the architecture of a laugh, the setup, the anticipation, the surprise, the payoff. He learned how to control an audience, to build a crescendo of laughter, to hold a pause for maximum effect. In 1910, the call came for the Carnot Company to embark on a tour of the United States. For Charlie, it was a voyage to a mythic land. America was the land of the future, of skyscrapers, of limitless horizontality, a stark contrast to the cramped, vertical class structure of England. As the SS Caranderona sailed into New York Harbor in September 1910, and he saw the skyline of Manhattan and the Statue of Liberty, he felt a surge of optimism. He was 21 years old, a seasoned professional, carrying the scars of a London childhood, but armed with a world-class craft. He was ready for anything. He just didn't know that a new art form, waiting in the sun-bleached hills of California, was about to choose him as its first true genius. The America of 1910 was in the grip of a new addiction, the Nickelodeon. For 5 cents, the masses could escape into a 15-minute world of fantasy, drama, and, most popularly, slapstick comedy. The epicenter of this chaos was Max Sennett's Keystone Studios in Edendale, California. Sennett, a former Boilermaker and actor, had a simple cinematic philosophy: bring 'em back fast and give 'em a laugh. His films were frantic, anarchic, and brutally physical, a world of custard pies, madcap chases, and the bumbling Keystone cops. Sennett saw the Carnot Company during their tour, and his eye was caught by the young Englishman with the remarkably expressive face. He was particularly impressed by Charlie's drunk-in-the-club routine from the sketch A Night in an English Music Hall. He saw a potential star. Through an agent, he offered Chaplin a contract to come to Hollywood and make pictures. The salary was $150 a week. For Chaplin, it was a monumental decision. The stage was his life, his security. The movies were considered a vulgar, fleeting novelty, a haven for failed actors. But the money was good, and the opportunity was intriguing. After tense negotiations, he signed a 1-year contract. When he arrived at the Keystone lot in December 1913, he was appalled. It was a chaotic, frenzied madhouse. Sennett had no use for scripts or rehearsals. Films were improvised on the spot, shot in a few hours, and edited with a meat cleaver. The pace was relentless. The veteran Keystone players like Mabel Normand and Ford Sterling were masters of this broad, aggressive style. They saw the new Englishman with his quiet, observational methods and his desire to as pretentious and difficult. His first film, Making a Living, released February 2, 1914, was a disaster. Directed by Henry Pate Lerman, a man with whom Chaplin instantly clashed, it featured Charlie as a slick, mustachioed con man in a frock coat. The performance was broad and derivative, lost in the frantic editing. He was miserable. He felt his subtlety was being bulldozed by the Keystone chaos. The tension came to a head on his 11th film, Mabel's Strange Predicament, directed by Mabel Normand. They argued bitterly over a scene. Chaplin, frustrated, walked off the set. Sennett was livid and ready to fire him, but in a moment of defiant self-assurance, he made a desperate plea. If Sennett would just let him direct his own films, he would deliver something special. He would take full responsibility. Sennett, perhaps seeing a glimmer of something beneath the frustration or simply wanting to avoid further trouble, reluctantly agreed. It was the most important negotiation of Chaplin's life. He had won his creative freedom. The film was Kid Auto Races at Venice, released February 7, 1914. The premise was simple. A filmmaker, Lerman, is trying to document a real-life soapbox derby, but a nuisance, Chaplin, keeps wandering into the shot, mugging for the camera. The entire film is a meta-commentary on the very act of filmmaking and the nature of celebrity. For this film, Chaplin knew he needed a defining visual identity. Standing in the Keystone dressing room, he pieced together a character from the accumulated contradictions of his own life and the costumes at hand. The process was one of intuitive alchemy. The baggy trousers, taken from Fatty Arbuckle's wardrobe, suggested the pants of a larger man, hand-me-downs, a symbol of poverty and clownishness. The tight coat, meant for a much larger man, but worn snug to give the impression of a shabby gentility, a man clinging to the remnants of respectability. The derby hat, too small, it sat precariously on his head, a symbol of aspirational class that never quite fit. The oversized shoes, worn on the wrong feet to create his famous splay-footed walk, they were the pragmatic footwear of a man who walks everywhere, a source of both clumsiness and a peculiar graceful agility. The mustache, small, neat, and toothbrush-like, it was a signature of the dandy of the period, but shrunk down so not to hide his most expressive feature, his mouth. The cane, a symbol of upper-class affectation used by a man with no class at all. It became a tool, a weapon, a partner in dance, an extension of his will. He looked in the mirror. The figure was a paradox, a gentleman vagabond, a poet scoundrel. He was, as Chaplin later defined him, a tramp, a gentleman, a poet, a dreamer, a lonely fellow, always hopeful of romance and adventure. When he waddled onto the set for Kid Auto Races, the crew burst into spontaneous laughter. The character was instantly, iconically funny. The film itself is a crude one-reeler, but it is a holy relic, the baptism of the tramp. He is impish, anarchic, and possessed of an unshakable, misplaced confidence. He is a performer who will not be ignored, a metaphor for Chaplin's own desperate need to be seen and to control his own image. The public response was volcanic. Within months, Charlie Chaplin and The Little Tramp were global phenomena. The character was a Rorschach test. For the working class, he was one of their own, forever being kicked by authority, but always bouncing back. For intellectuals, he was a symbol of the individual against the machine, the id against the superego. For children, he was a magical, mischievous sprite. Chaplin mania swept the world. His image was reproduced on dolls, toys, comic strips, and cigarettes. The world had fallen in love with a silhouette. Chaplin's rise was meteoric, and he matched it with a ruthless understanding of his own commercial and artistic value. After his one-year contract with Keystone ended, he was a superstar. He signed with the S&A Film Manufacturing Company for $1,250 a week, then an astronomical figure. A year later, he moved to the Mutual Film Corporation for $670,000 a year, a contract that stunned the world and made him the highest-paid person on the planet since the days of kings. But this was never just about money. It was about control. With each move, he demanded and received total creative autonomy. At Mutual in 1916, he was given his own studio at 1025 Lillian Way in Hollywood. It became his fortress, his laboratory, his factory. Here, the shy, often inarticulate man off screen transformed into a tyrannical, obsessive genius on the set. His method was one of relentless perfectionism. He had no finished script. He would arrive on set with a vague premise, a pawn shop, a roller rink, a department store, and begin to improvise. A simple prop could trigger a cascade of comic invention. The filming of the classic sequence in The Pawn Shop 1916, where the tramp examines an alarm clock, is the quintessential example. Chaplin spent days on this single scene. The clock became a patient. He took its pulse, listened to its tick with a stethoscope, tapped it, fed it a spoonful of castor oil, and finally took a can opener to it as if performing major surgery. It was a 5-minute masterpiece built from a single idea, shot and reshot over 100 times until every gesture, every reaction was perfect. He drove his stock company of actors, loyal players like Edna Purviance, Eric Campbell, and Albert Austin, to the brink of exhaustion. He was a taskmaster, but they followed him because they were participating in the creation of something extraordinary. He was constructing gags with the precision of an engineer and the soul of a poet. He understood that comedy was about rhythm, like music. A sequence in 1 a.m. 1916, where he plays a drunk trying to get up a flight of stairs and into bed, is a flawless comic ballet, a symphony of stumbling, slipping, and near misses. His personal life, however, was failing to find the same perfect rhythm. In 1918, he hastily married 16-year-old Mildred Harris, a young actress he had gotten pregnant. The pregnancy turned out to be a phantom, but the marriage proceeded. It was a disaster from the start. Chaplin, a 29-year-old work-obsessed genius, had nothing in common with a teenage girl. He found her intellectually barren and emotionally draining. The marriage ended in a bitter public divorce in 1920, costing him $100,000 and a great deal of personal notoriety. It was the beginning of a lifelong pattern. His attraction to very young, malleable women, a search for an uncorrupted innocence that perhaps mirrored his idealized memory of his mother, but which invariably led to scandal and heartache. By the end of the decade, Chaplin was no longer just a movie star. He was an institution. In 1919, he joined forces with the other three most powerful figures in Hollywood, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, to form United Artists. This was a revolutionary act, a declaration of independence from the studio system. The artists were now the owners. The little tramp was a corporate titan. The boy who had been a number in the Hanwell workhouse was now one of the most powerful men in the world's most powerful new industry. He had built an empire on a pair of baggy pants and a dream of dignity. The founding of United Artists gave Chaplin the ultimate gift, time. No longer shackled to the relentless production schedule of a studio, he could now pursue his artistic ambitions at his own notoriously slow pace. He decided to use this freedom to expand his art, to move from the two-reel short subject to the feature-length film. For his first venture, he would mind the most painful load of his own past, his childhood. The Kid, 1921, was not just a film, it was an act of cinematic psychoanalysis. The story of the tramp finding an abandoned baby in an alley and raising him as his own was drawn directly from the well of his own experience with poverty, abandonment, and the fierce, protective bond with his brother Sidney. The Kid, played with astonishing naturalism by 5-year-old Jackie Coogan, is not a sentimental prop. He is a partner in survival. Together, they form a makeshift family unit, a small business. The Kid breaks windows and the tramp repairs them, and a fortress against a hostile world. The film is a masterpiece of tone, seamlessly weaving brutal social realism with flights of fantasy and sublime comedy. The tenement setting is gritty and authentic. The threat of the orphanage authorities is genuinely terrifying. The scene where they come to take the boy away is one of the most emotionally charged sequences Chaplin ever filmed. The tramp's desperate, acrobatic battle on the stairwell to save the child is not just a comic chase, it is the visceral expression of a parent's primal fear. His face, when he finally rescues the boy and holds him safe, radiates a relief so profound it transcends acting. It feels utterly real because, for Chaplin, it was. Intercut with this drama is a beautiful dream sequence where the tramp dreams his slum neighborhood is transformed into a heavenly paradise where even the lawmen are angels and everyone is happy. It is a poignant expression of the escapism that both his art and his childhood fantasies provided.
The Kid was a monumental, critical, and commercial success. It proved that an audience would invest in the Tramp for a full 6 reels, that they would laugh with him and cry for him. It cemented Chaplin's status not just as a comedian, but as a serious artist, capable of profound emotional depth. Emboldened by the success of The Kid, Chaplin set his sights on an even more ambitious project, an epic comedy. He found his subject in the Klondike Gold Rush, a historical event that embodied the grand, often cruel American dream of striking it rich. The Gold Rush, 1925, would become the film he would later say he most wanted to be remembered by. The film is a series of exquisitely constructed set pieces, each a self-contained masterpiece of comic storytelling, yet all serving the larger narrative of survival and hope. The lone prospector, the Tramp, is the ultimate outsider, thrust into the most hostile environment on Earth. The cabin teetering on the precipice, trapped in a storm, the Tramp and his prospector partner, Big Jim McKay, played by Max Swain, take refuge in a cabin that is blown to the edge of a cliff. The subsequent scenes of the cabin teetering back and forth with the two men sliding from one end to the other is a sublime piece of suspense and physical comedy. It's a perfect metaphor for the precariousness of their lives. The boiled boot banquet. Starving, the Tramp is forced to cook a leather boot. He serves it with the grace of a master chef, twirling the laces like spaghetti, sucking the nails like chicken bones, and distributing the sole with fastidious fairness. The scene is hilarious, but it is also a testament to the human capacity to impose dignity and ritual upon the most abject circumstances. The Oceana roll dance at a New Year's Eve party in a dance hall, the Tramp, hoping to impress the beautiful Georgia, played by Georgia Hale, performs a dance. Lacking a partner, he impales 2 dinner rolls with forks and from behind a curtain performs a graceful, enchanting ballet with his hands. The scene is pure, wordless poetry. It is the Tramp's soul made visible, clumsy, hopeful, and unexpectedly beautiful. The Gold Rush represents the absolute pinnacle of Chaplin's silent art. Every gag is organic to the situation and the character. The pathos, his longing for Georgia, a woman far out of his league, is earned and deeply moving. The film's happy ending, where the Tramp and Big Jim actually strike gold and the Tramp wins the girl, feels like a genuine, hard-won victory. It is the most perfectly realized and balanced of all his silent features. As Chaplin was preparing the Gold Rush, a revolution was brewing in the film industry. Sound technology was advancing rapidly. In 1927, the jazz singer ushered in the era of the talkie, and the industry was turned upside down. Stars with heavy accents or squeaky voices saw their careers vanish overnight. The panic was palpable. The question on everyone's mind was, what will Chaplin do? The consensus was that the Tramp was finished. How could this universal, wordless symbol speak? Would he have a Cockney accent? An American one? To give him a voice would be to localize him, to make him specific, to destroy the very quality that made him a global icon. Chaplin was defiant. He believed in the universal language of pantomime. He saw sound as a novelty that would eventually fade. He was wrong about its staying power, but right about his own art.
He embarked on City Lights, 1931, as a silent film in a world that had embraced sound. It was an act of supreme artistic and commercial arrogance. The film, subtitled A Comedy Romance in Pantomime, is arguably his most perfect and emotionally resonant creation. The plot is the quintessential Tramp story. He falls in love with a blind flower girl, Virginia Cheryl, who, unable to see his shabbiness, mistakes him for a millionaire. The entire narrative is built on this beautiful, tragic misunderstanding. The Tramp, in love, goes to absurd, heroic, and often self-sacrificing lengths to get money for an operation that will restore her sight. The production was plagued with difficulties, chiefly with the inexperienced and often unresponsive Virginia Cheryl. Chaplin's perfectionism became legendary. The simple, wordless scene where the Tramp first meets the flower girl, a sequence of glances and small gestures where he buys a flower and then stands mesmerized by her beauty, reportedly took 342 takes. Chaplin was searching for a purity of emotion that transcended language. He did use sound, but as a tool, not a master. He composed his own musical score, a beautiful, leitmotif-driven composition that perfectly underscored the action and emotion. He used sound for brilliant comic effect, most famously in the party scene where the tramp, at a swanky soiree, has accidentally swallowed a whistle. Every time he hiccups, a piercing whistle sounds, causing dogs to bark and taxicabs to screech to a halt across the city. The film's final scene is one of the most celebrated and analyzed in cinema history. The flower girl, her sight restored, runs a successful flower shop. The tramp, recently released from prison, is once again a ragged, destitute figure. He shuffles past her window. She sees this forlorn man and, out of pity, offers him a coin and a flower. As she presses the coin into his hand, she recognizes the touch. Her expression shifts from charity to confusion to dawning, heartbreaking realization. "You," the title card reads. The final, lingering close-up is on Chaplin's face. It is a masterpiece of micro-expression. Hope, fear, love, shame, and a desperate, questioning humility. He points to himself, as if to say, "You can see me now?" She nods, smiling through her tears. The film ends on his face, a trembling, infinitely complex smile that holds a universe of emotion. It is the ultimate expression of his art. Without a single word spoken, he has conveyed the entire, tragic, beautiful truth of the story. City Lights was a triumph, both critically and commercially. It proved Chaplin right. The public still craved his silent poetry. By the mid-1930s, the world was in the grip of the Great Depression. Chaplin, now a man of immense wealth, was increasingly politically engaged. He was deeply affected by the social and economic turmoil, the breadlines, and the despair. He began work on a new film, Modern Times, 1936, which would serve as his final, brilliant farewell to the little tramp and a savage satire on the industrial machine. The film is a direct attack on the dehumanizing nature of modern industry. The tramp is a factory worker on a relentless assembly line, his sole job to tighten two nuts on a ceaselessly moving conveyor belt. The pace is insane, dictated by a monstrous, impersonal boss who appears on a giant video screen, a prescient vision of Big Brother. The tramp's body and mind cannot cope. In the film's most famous metaphor, he has a nervous breakdown and is literally sucked into the cogs of the gigantic machinery. He is chewed up and spat out by the machine, a powerful image for the crushing of the individual by capitalism. The film is filled with pointed social commentary, strikes, unemployment, police brutality, and the desperate, often absurd scramble for food and shelter. Yet it is never a dreary lecture. It is one of his most funny films, filled with sublime comic sequences, like his roller skating blindfolded near a precipitous drop in a department store, or his accidental ingestion of cocaine, which gives him a superhuman and hilarious energy in prison. At the heart of the film is the gamine, a spirited, feral orphan played with fiery, luminous energy by Paulette Goddard, who would become his third wife and one of the great loves of his life. Together, the tramp and the gamin dream of a simple, domestic life, a home that constantly eludes them. They are two survivors against the world. In the film's final, poignant moments, they are once again on the road, having failed to achieve their dream. But this time, as they walk away, the tramp tells the gamin to buck up and smile. He shrugs, and they march bravely down the road into the dawn. And then, for the first time ever, the audience hears the tramp's voice. But it's not dialogue. In a restaurant, forced to sing, he performs a song in a nonsense, gibberish language. It is a final act of defiance, a demonstration that even when forced to use sound, he will subvert it, turn it into another form of pantomime. It was the perfect, graceful, and deeply moving exit for the character who had defined him for over 20 years. The little tramp, the universal symbol of resilience, walked off into the sunrise, and he never came back. With the tramp retired, Chaplin was free to speak,
and the world of the late 1930s was a place that desperately needed a voice of reason. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany filled Chaplin with a cold, personal dread. He was also unnerved by the physical resemblance, the same toothbrush mustache, and the fact they were born just 4 days apart. He saw in Hitler a grotesque, evil doppelganger, a perversion of his own iconic image. He decided to make a film that would satirize and demolish the Führer. The Great Dictator was a breathtaking act of courage. The United States was still officially neutral, and there were powerful isolationist and even pro-fascist elements in the country, including figures like Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford. Making a film that openly mocked Hitler was a huge commercial and personal risk. The German ambassador in Washington even lodged a formal complaint. The film is a brilliant.
Thank you for joining me and revisiting his remarkable life. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next biography. And let me know in the comments, what about Charlie Chaplin's story stood out to you the most? Until next time, be real, stay curious, and keep exploring stories that matter.